Most people do not stay broke because they are lazy. They stay broke because they keep trying to improve their life without first reducing it to something a machine can actually improve. That sentence may sound severe. It is meant to be, I have lived long enough to see that the great economic divide is not simply between people who work hard and people who do not. The divide is often between people who are pointless. A scattered person can be sincere, energetic, educated, and exhausted, and still produce very little that the market is willing to pay for at a high rate. A pointed person may look narrow for a season, even obsessive, even socially dull, and then very suddenly his life changes shape. That is the pattern. The market pays a great deal for focused usefulness and almost nothing for generalized good intentions. When I was younger, people often mistook me for someone who had a supernatural tolerance for boredom. That was not exactly right. What I had was a very early understanding that boredom is often the front gate to wealth. The crowd wants stimulation. Wealth usually wants repetition. The crowd wants novelty. Wealth usually wants a machine. The crowd wants applause while the work is still becoming real. Wealth usually wants silence until the work can survive sunlight. That is why so many people remain trapped. They are trying to build a different financial life while still keeping every comfort, every distraction, every social rhythm, every ego signal, and every excuse that belongs to the life they say they want to leave. It does not work that way. If you want a different result, the old life must lose territory. A new income engine needs room, and room is almost always created by subtraction before it is rewarded by multiplication. That is the first truth I would tell any person who wants to change his money fast. Not permanently rich by next Tuesday, not fantasy rich, not paper rich, actually stronger, actually cash flowing, actually building something that did not exist before. The first truth is that for a while almost everything else must come second. That does not mean become miserable for sport. It means pick a primary objective and then have the courage to make the calendar tell the truth about what matters. Most people say they want more money. Then they continue spending their best evening hours on entertainment, low-value socializing, passive consumption, random scrolling, emotional recovery rituals, and all the little leaks that make a person feel busy without ever making him more valuable. They are not serious, or, to be more generous, they are serious in language, but not yet in structure. Structure is where seriousness begins. A man does not declare war on his old life with a speech. He does it with his schedule. If I wanted to change my income meaningfully in 1 year, I would first make a very plain decision. For 1 year, the calendar is not organized around comfort. It is organized around construction. That means if something does not make money, build a money skill, protect health, or preserve the energy required to keep doing those first two things. It had better have a very good reason for surviving in the calendar. People hear that and call it extreme. Of course it is extreme. Ordinary results belong to ordinary effort arranged in ordinary patterns. If you want a financial pivot, you do not get there by lightly decorating your old life with a few productive intentions. You get there by reducing the old life long enough that a new one has enough room to become real. There is another part people do not say out loud. This process is embarrassing. That may be the most valuable sentence I can give you. The real cheat code is not confidence. It is embarrassment tolerance. A great many people never get rich enough to change their lives because they are too fragile to look foolish while they are still becoming dangerous. They want the successful identity before they have earned the successful structure. They want permission. They want immediate understanding from the people around them. They want their family to approve, their friends to admire, their peers to say that sounds smart, and the market to reward them before they have absorbed enough rejection to know whether they are serious. That is not how this works. If you are trying to build a new cash flow engine, there will be a period when you look smaller than your ambition. You will offer services that feel beneath your self-image. You will reach out to strangers who do not answer. You will make work that is not yet elegant. You will say things in sales conversations that make you cringe an hour later in the shower. You will feel ignored. You will feel late. You will feel uncertain whether this is courage or foolishness. Good, that is the tuition. If you can tolerate looking stupid for a year, you give yourself a chance to look powerful for a very long time. If you cannot tolerate looking stupid for a year, you will probably spend decades looking respectable while remaining financially weak. That is the trade. I know which side I prefer. Now let us move to the next principle, because this is where people usually become vague. They say, I want more money. That is not a target. A machine cannot be built around a wish. It can be built around a scoreboard. I like scoreboards because they force honesty. If I were serious about changing my financial life in a year, I would not allow myself the luxury of broad language. I would pick a number that actually changes the household. A first $10,000 month is a useful number because it does not merely flatter the imagination. It changes behavior. It proves the process exists. It forces pricing, volume, distribution, and repeatability to become real rather than theoretical. The exact number may vary with the person, but the principle does not. You need a scoreboard that can be counted. Otherwise, you will spend 12 months telling yourself you are making progress while building a stack of productive-looking fragments that never became a business. A clear metric does something else. It reveals whether your daily actions are attached to the target or simply orbiting it. Most people like to feel near their goal. Very few arrange their day so the goal can locate them. That is why I would physically write the target down. Not because ink is magical, because physical commitments embarrass vague thinking. A man who writes a number and a date knows he is no longer dating his ambition casually. He is giving it terms that matters. Once the target exists, people run toward tools, books, courses, videos. Another folder of notes. I have nothing against learning. I have spent most of my life reading and thinking. But I also know that learning without conversion becomes a very elegant form of avoidance. You must know what kind of education matches the stage you are in. If you are trying to get rich quickly through building a skill-based cash machine, your early education should not be primarily philosophical. It should be operational. You need to understand offers, selling, systems, behavior, and daily repetition. You do not need the whole library. You need companion books. You need a small shelf of ideas that actually help you perform when you are tired, under-rewarded, and not yet being taken seriously. The reason I like a handful of books rather than 100 is the same reason I like a concentrated portfolio of thoughts. Too much information early can become a refuge for the indecisive. A few good operating principles are more valuable than an endless river of motivational noise. You must learn enough to act better this week, not collect enough to sound impressive at dinner. Learning should make you more executable. Otherwise, it is vanity-wearing literacy. Then there is the question of skill. This is where the modern world has confused many people, because it keeps telling them to follow passion before they have first built economic usefulness. That advice has probably stranded more capable people than almost any other slogan. I am not against passion. I simply know that passion often arrives after competence, not before it. If you want to create cash flow fast, choose a money skill, not an identity fantasy. Sales, copywriting, paid advertising, editing, design that moves revenue, appointment setting, automation, outbound prospecting, offer construction. Any skill that helps another person make money, save time, reduce cost, or buy certainty gets paid faster than a skill chosen, mainly because it feels emotionally expressive. This is important. In the beginning, your job is not to become fascinating. It is to become useful enough that money cannot ignore you. A money skill is not sacred. It is not your final personality. It is an economic lever. Treat it that way. Pick one, not 5. Not a cluster that flatters your fear of commitment. One, then practice it every day. Not by imagining it. Not by collecting tutorials like stamps, by doing it. Badly at first, repeatedly, a person does not get paid well for knowing what good copy looks like. He gets paid when he can write copy that causes action. A person does not get paid because he admires beautiful editing. He gets paid when he can cut footage into something a client is glad to pay for. Again, skill is not an aesthetic category. It is a market category. Does someone pay for the result? If yes, you are close. If no, you may still be in the hobby phase and calling it ambition. That is a dangerous confusion. Another thing I would do, and I did versions of this all my life, is stay very quiet around people who have not earned the right to shape the goal. This is not because mystery is attractive. It is because fragility is real. Early efforts are tender. An undeveloped income engine can be killed by too much commentary from people who do not understand what you are trying to build. I do not take advice from people whose financial lives I would not want to inherit whole. That saves time. A great many families, friends, and coworkers do not consciously want you to fail. They simply want your attempt to stop making them uncomfortable. A person taking focused action is a kind of accusation against everyone nearby who keeps postponing his own change. That is why they reach for discouragement disguised as realism. Be careful. When you are building a new income stream, you are not yet a tree. You are a seed. Seeds require protection, not debate. Later, when the thing has roots, sunlight is fine. Early on, too much external opinion can become frost. So work quietly, talk less, build more. And if you need community, buy proximity to competence instead of proximity to familiarity. This is a huge distinction. Old environments often cannot grow new identities. If your current environment contained the full ingredients required to make you rich, you likely would not still be where you are. That is not an insult. It is an ecological observation. Some seeds do not fail because they are bad seeds. They fail because they were planted in shade. So move your body and your attention closer to people who transact at a higher level. Go where business is being discussed seriously. Meet operators. Watch how people make decisions around money. Do not merely listen to what they say on stage. Observe what they repeat in private. What do they ignore? What do they measure? What do they outsource? What do they solve first? That is how you buy speed without buying fantasy. And if money is tight, do not complain that you cannot afford elite proximity. Go where access is cheap or free, volunteer at events. Attend workshops. Join practical communities around your chosen skill. You are not trying to look important. You are trying to reduce avoidable ignorance. Feedback accelerates the learning curve. That is one of the best investments in the world. Once you have chosen the skill and begun working on it daily, you face the first real test: who will pay you. This is where most people become sentimental and make things much harder than they need to be. They want to sell to people like themselves. They want to serve the broad public. They want to chase giant audiences with weak wallets. That is usually a mistake. In the beginning, sell to people with money and urgency. People who already spend, people for whom your service can either make or protect far more money than it costs. Dentists, real estate teams, legal offices, home services, clinics, creators with actual revenue, niches where the buyer understands outcomes. This matters because early business is fragile enough without educating the market from zero. I do not want to persuade a broke customer that he should care. I want to sell to a customer who already knows the pain of not solving the problem that makes everything faster. Then I want a simple offer, painfully simple. One outcome, one deliverable, one timeline, one price. That is it. No clouds of features, no sprawling descriptions designed to make you feel sophisticated. Clarity sells. Complexity delays. If you cannot explain what you do in one sentence, the problem is not the prospect. The problem is your thinking. Adults buy outcomes, speed, certainty, and relief. They do not pay you because your slide deck had many colors. The next part is where almost everyone loses courage. You need proof, and proof does not begin with a polished brand. It begins when a stranger gives you money. That is the inflection point. Until then, you have a theory. After that, you have a market signal. The amount does not matter as much as people think. $100 from a stranger can teach you more than months of free praise from friends, because strangers do not pay to protect your feelings. If they pay, something worked. That is the real threshold. I would gladly spend some time and even lose a little money in the early days to get that proof fast. because that is how puzzle pieces appear. You discover what language converts, what objections arise, what delivery looks like in reality, what the customer actually values compared with what you imagined he would value. You stop theorizing and start learning. A person who refuses early discomfort usually extends early ignorance. I do not want that. I want feedback, fast. Then, when the first result exists, document it. This is where the machine begins. Most people reinvent their own work because they treat every job as a separate performance. That is exhausting and unscalable. A serious operator documents what worked: the pitch, the proposal, the delivery checklist, the weekly update, the testimonial request, the before and after, the proof language. All of it. Each win should reduce future guessing. That is what systems do. They convert isolated success into repeatable success. And repeatable success is what clients actually buy when they are buying a serious professional. A testimonial is not decoration. It is proof of ability A before. And after story is not vanity. It is transferability. You are telling the next buyer, I solved this for someone like you, which means I am no longer asking you for blind faith. That lowers friction. The lower the friction, the faster the close. Now we come to distribution. This is the part that almost nobody respects early enough. People think the main bottleneck is skill. Usually it is not. Once the offer works at all, the real bottleneck becomes attention. People do not know you exist. That is the problem. You can have a perfectly good offer and still starve because no one sees it off. This is why I say distribution is worth more than many talented people are willing to admit. A mediocre product with superior distribution can dominate a much better product that nobody hears about. That may offend the romantic mind. Too bad. Business is not a poetry contest, so pick one channel and get loud inside it. One, not five. Not all platforms, because you are afraid that choosing one means missing something. Choice speeds repetition. Repetition speeds recognition. If you choose email, then email relentlessly and intelligently. If you choose outbound direct messages or cold outreach, then do it daily and get better at it by doing it daily. If you choose content, then produce in a way that feeds your specific buyer rather than your vanity metrics. One channel, 1 year, daily activity. That is how obscurity dies. And let me give you a simple hierarchy that most beginners reverse. Promotion first, fulfillment second. Not because delivery does not matter, because no delivery happens if no one buys. Most people hide in the comfort of doing work because selling feels vulnerable. They tell themselves they are being productive. Often they are just building a private museum of unused competence. I have no use for private museums. You must wake up and create demand before you bury yourself in labor. That is what keeps the machine fed. Then, when demand begins exceeding your current capacity, a new mistake becomes tempting. Do everything yourself out of pride. That is how people build cages and call them businesses. At some point, boring, repeatable work must be hired out. Not first, not before there is any proof, but when the math supports it, yes. And who you hire first matters. Not a partner for the sake of emotional companionship. Not a chief operating officer, because the title sounds impressive. You hire the part of the work that repeats, drains time, does not need your direct judgment, and steals hours from sales or improvement. That is the rule. The founder's highest value hours should migrate toward promotion, closing, problem solving, quality control, and design of the next bottleneck. Everything else should gradually be systematized and delegated. The business should become less dependent on your body and more dependent on your process. That is how a job turns into a machine. I have no interest in jobs with extra paperwork. I want machines. Then comes pricing. This is where many capable people stay poor because they confuse being liked with being paid. They undercharge, they customize too much. They apologize for their prices. They make their service look like a favor instead of a commercial exchange. That is amateur thinking. Once you have proof and an identifiable customer, package the offer. Create clear tiers. Anchor with a premium option, so the middle becomes easier to buy. Raise price when certainty and proof rise, Do not let custom work eat your margins alive. If every single client requires a new invention, then you are not building a scalable business. You are freelancing with delusions of grandeur. I want packages. I want standard language. I want clear scope. I want additional work to require additional money. This is what adults do. The market does not reward resentment. It rewards clarity. And when people feel safe with you, they stop negotiating like frightened tourists. They renew. They refer. They buy the premium tier because the risk of failure feels higher than the price difference. That is the right dynamic. Now we reach the part people fantasize about and then usually mishandle. The money starts coming in. This is where many stories die. Not because revenue is absent, because ego arrives. The first decent money in a new business is dangerous money. It whispers, "You did it. Upgrade the apartment. Upgrade the wardrobe. Take the trip. Announce the transformation. You deserve it." No, you are not at the celebration stage. You are at the oxygen stage. Revenue is not yet yours. Revenue belongs first to stabilization. The machine must be fed before the founder gets flattered. This is where rich operators separate from noisy ones. They reinvest like maniacs when the business is still proving itself, not recklessly, deliberately. Tools that save time, systems that reduce errors, gear that raises quality, education that removes the next bottleneck, people who increase capacity, legal structure, clean contracts, tax competence, reporting, onboarding, follow-up systems, all the unglamorous things that turn hustle into reliability. Reliability is expensive to build and priceless once built. People think professionalism is style. It is mostly process, fast response times, clear expectations, consistent execution, fewer surprises, better handoffs, Adults do not love you because you are passionate. They love you because you are safe to rely on. Safe to rely on is a premium category. That is where wealth begins leaving the stage of hustle and entering the stage of enterprise value. Then, after enough time, you begin noticing something deeper. The real money is not in doing the work. It is in where the value is created, captured, and retained. This is where most people finally see that there are levels. A beginner asks, "How do I make more money with my hours?" An adult asks, "Where is the value created and who owns the mechanism?" That is a completely different question. It pushes you toward leverage, toward ownership, toward recurring revenue, toward performance deals, toward referral engines, toward products and systems rather than isolated transactions, toward assets that continue working when your mood does not. That is where the real shift happens. The first year is not usually about building a giant empire. It is about proving that you can go from labor, for money thinking, to system, for money thinking. That is the actual pivot. Then the final instruction becomes simpler than people expect. Do more of what already works. Not because imagination is bad, because premature novelty is the playground of undisciplined operators. A business is not art in the way people pretend. A business is often manufacturing. Same inputs, improved process, more efficient output, cleaner pipeline, better close rate, better retention, better delivery, higher prices, more repeatability, more referrals. Scale usually comes from intensified clarity, not endless reinvention. You do not need a new idea every week. You need a better measured repetition of the idea that already proved it can be sold. Then the math becomes real. You discover whether your bottleneck is demand or capacity, too few buyers, or too little ability to deliver. Either one can be fixed if honestly seen. That is why measurement matters. How many outreaches, how many replies, how many booked calls, how many closes, how much retention, how much margin, what does one new client actually produce? How long does delivery take? What can be templated? What must remain human? This is not passion language. This is operator language. And operator language is what gets a person from talk to cash flow. Now let me tell you the truth about the timeline, because I dislike fantasy. You can make meaningful money in the first year if you are pointed enough, coachable enough, and willing enough to live under your current self. Image for a while. You can absolutely create your first 5-figure month faster than most people think. But I do not want you confusing that with permanent security. The first year is a pivot year, not a coronation. It is the year you prove that the old life no longer has full control over your earning power. That is huge. Still, it may take around 3 years before you begin feeling that the thing has real bones. It may take 7 before outsiders call you an overnight success. And it may take 10 or more before the machine is stable enough that you are no longer wondering whether the whole thing depends too much on your current energy. That is normal. The good news is that time passes whether you use it or not. The person who says 10 years is too long will still meet 10 years, a machine or regret. If I were younger and had to make a 1-year financial pivot from a relatively ordinary starting point, I would not waste time hunting for magic. I would cut the calendar down to essentials. Choose one cash skill, practice daily, sell to people with money, get paid by strangers, document results. Pick one distribution channel. Promote first. Delegate the boring repetition once math allows. Raise prices through proof and clarity. Reinvest aggressively. Build systems. Then do more of what works until the thing becomes undeniable. That is not glamorous. It is also how a great many fortunes quietly begin. The world loves stories of sudden luck because sudden luck excuses its own inaction. I prefer another story. The story where someone became useful enough, disciplined enough, and repetition, friendly enough that money finally had no honest reason to ignore him. That story is available to far more people than the culture wants to admit. It just requires a year most people are unwilling to live. If you are willing to live that year, a very different life can begin afterward. Not because the world owed it to you, because you finally built something the world was willing to pay for, again and again, without needing your self-esteem to supervise every step. That is how you pivot financially. Not by hoping more visible, more repeatable, and less emotionally expensive to yourself. That is the game. And it is a much better game than most people are playing now.